We've been around now for 3 generations since 1955. Business was actually started by my grandfather, and since 2008, I've been the president and in charge of really the day-to-day operations of the company. So that's a little more than a decade at the helm is my role specifically. Harry Davis and Company, again, started in the 1950s, the middle of the 20th century, as a buyer and seller of industrial equipment, generic industrial equipment. And over the decades, up to the 1970s, that's really where our focus was, buying and selling, auctioning, if you will. And in the 1970s, we did a couple of fluid milk dairy facilities as auction sales. And that began our entree to the food and dairy industries. And from that, we began, cultivating new business within specifically the dairy industry. So fast forwarding to the late 80s, we had become largely a food industry support service company. Our services into the 90s and into the 2000s included appraisals or asset-based lending appraisal business, as well as auction sales. And then into the early 2000s and 2010s, we started to broker the sale of complete facilities, factories, real estate, equipment for continued operation, in addition to the appraisal work that we do on machinery and equipment, in addition to the work that we do selling, with an auction platform when we have surplus equipment to get our arms around. So there's every business in the country, I'm sure, has been impacted by the coronavirus. Stay-at-home orders, lack of travel. Our office is working remotely, other than myself. I've been in the office almost every day for the last 6 weeks, including weekends. But the rest of my office have been working from home. So all of our coworkers and employees, they're able to juggle their home life and their work life, from home. One of the big challenges for us is to continue our assistance and our services to food facilities with helping them manage their assets. And what that means is every plant has equipment installed, operating, that may or may not be of use to them. Some of it may be surplus, some lines may be out of production. And also within facilities, you have just generic surplus that may not be utilized to the fullest extent any longer. So one of the big challenges for us, because although we're mostly well known for auction sales, but the bigger side of our business, frankly, is our appraisal business. We value equipment for a multitude of reasons, both for asset-based lending reasons, mergers and acquisition reasons, tax appeal reasons. So one of our big challenges is how do we continue to provide those services while everyone's on home, at home and not able to get around the country to do that kind of work. So we've been engaging with companies to have some person from that facility basically taking some photographs, giving us some video, and we're able to then work through some key personnel from those facilities and helping them sort of, again, understand what those assets mean in terms of use, in terms of resale, in terms of valuation, for, again, a multitude of reasons. Number one, I would say, it goes without saying, you got to protect your employees, you got to protect your team. And once you have put in procedures to take care of that, don't lose sight of the bigger picture. One of the biggest most important items right now for businesses, especially in the food facility, food manufacturing world, is how do you maximize the value of what you have in your facility. And if equipment is overtaxed and you're being, your personal property tax assessments are out of line, that's costing you money on an annual basis. If equipment is not in use, it has significant value, but it may not be anything more than a tax write-down for a company. So I would suggest to companies who have put the safety of their employees at the forefront and they've dealt with those issues and they have systems in place, don't forget about the bottom line and making money and maximizing the value of what you have in your plant. Every facility that makes a food or beverage product has used equipment in their plant, because once they bought it, even if it was brand new, it is now used. And that doesn't mean that it has less utility. It just means that it is a quote unquote used piece of equipment. And if that equipment is not being put into full production, it pays to know what its value is, both as a tax deduction, as a write-down if it's less than 7 years old, or if it's something that could be monetized or assessed for a loan basis scenario. So there's lots of things to maximize the functionality of manufacturers outside of just making your food or beverage product. And that's where we come in. So one of the biggest pieces of advice we always give to our clients is you got to know what you don't know in some fashion or regard. And that includes calling in experts who can help maximize value for you. And that's one of the reasons why, we're big partners and critical partners for some of the largest food manufacturers in the world, and have been, frankly, for over 40 years and 3 generations. One of my key personnel suggested that we buy a Winnebago or rent a Winnebago, and we start, sending our teams and our crews out to job sites. Well, I'm not keen about that idea, but one of the big challenges is going to be getting back into the travel around the world scenarios, so we can visit the facilities, meet the personnel in the factories, so that we can report back to the finance teams and the operations teams and the C-level teams about what those assets really mean to them. So one of the things that we frankly are doing is we're doing a lot of FaceTime, a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of walking around plants from a virtual perspective. And I see that growing, frankly. And even as we transition back to quote unquote more normal times, I think the virtual commute is going to be more and more significant moving forward. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. Well, I will add that we have, since early March, we have conducted 7 online auction sales of machinery and equipment within the food industry. Those sales have all exceeded expectations. So I will say that thus far, equipment values have not only been sustained, but when you have something that's with a significant remaining useful life, those values, in fact, are still continuing to climb up. So logistics can become an issue that needs to be solved, but simply put, the value of equipment is not diminishing based on the current pandemic. And further to that point, I would also tell you that the amount of work that we have on our schedule is not decreasing. It's quite the opposite. There's so much more that needs to be looked at. And that occurs both in good times and in challenging times within the food industry. You've got new companies coming in, you've got legacy companies that may be acquiring other companies or being acquired themselves. So there's always a confluence of buyers and sellers in the food industry. Remembering that every person in the US and every other country, they have to eat. Everyone has to eat. The food has to come from somewhere. So maybe there'll be a push more towards locally processed and packaged food, but right now that's, we still have the food supply chains that we do, and a lot of those companies are very busy right now trying to adjust and provide additional avenues to bring their product to market. And that's, we come into play into that equation quite effectively and have for a long time.